Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamey, that's Heath, that's Chris. We're looking at Overreaction Monday now. Some players who have come off some disappointing game or games, and you might be a little bit concerned about them for your fantasy roster moving forward. So let's start with the first guy here that we're looking at, and that is Josh Jacobs, who had a disappointing game last night against the Chiefs. He's been a little bit up and down lately with his production, but 7 carries for 16 yards against Kansas City and 5 catches for 20 yards, which is nice. But I think people are waiting for more, Heath. So are we concerned about Josh Jacobs, or are we right back to him going against the Bengals in Week 11?
I mean, he'll be a low-end number 2 running back. That's kind of where he's at. He's had quite a few bad games this season that have been saved by touchdowns or saved by catches. This one was not quite done by that, but it wasn't too far away. I mean, 5 catches is pretty good. I like the fact that he's involved in the passing game, even with Kenyon Drake there. I don't really know exactly what happened to the Raiders' run game last night, but it hasn't been that great all season long. I think he's just a borderline number 2. You hope you have 2 better options, but he'll probably be in my top 24.
Yep, hopefully things get better for him. Again, hard to get away from him. The catches are nice, but a little too touchdown dependent, which has been a little bit hard to deal with when you're talking about a player where Josh Jacobs was drafted in the majority of leagues. All right, Chris, I gave you the easy one here. So we got Adrian Peterson next, and the reason he's on this list is because people had high expectations. You know, he steps in with Derrick Henry going down, but we've seen 18 carries in the 2 weeks, 42 yards rushing in the 2 weeks, did score a touchdown in the first game against the Rams in Week 9, did not score in Week 10 against the Saints, which is a tough matchup. They get very good schedule coming up. They get Houston in Week 11 to start, then they get New England a little tough, but after their bye, they get Jacksonville in Week 14, and then things should be okay for the Titans moving forward. But D'Onta Foreman has looked better. Jeremy McNichols in the passing game. Are you even holding on to Adrian Peterson at this point if you picked him up?
I mean, maybe if you're desperate in Week 11 against the Texans, I suppose he could get into the end zone, but I don't know what the overreaction would be here. I think the overreaction would be expecting the 36-year-old running back to be fantasy relevant. When he signed, I said what you should do is trade him immediately after you add him, because that was probably going to be the high point of his fantasy value. And that's what we're seeing. He's in a 3-way rotation at running back. D'Onta Foreman, like you said, just looks better. And I don't think D'Onta Foreman's a particularly good back, but he's at least looked a little more explosive. Peterson, he doesn't catch passes. He's touchdown dependent, and he's on a team that, doesn't necessarily view him as the lead back. So, no, I don't think there's any reason to hang on to Adrian Peterson unless you're absolutely desperate for potentially a Week 11 starter, because then Patriots and then a bye, I don't think you're going to use him in either of those 2 games.
All right, let's go now to the next guy here, and that's Javonte Williams. And I honestly wish there was a game for the Broncos next week, Heath, because Melvin Gordon fumbled and didn't play very much after fumbling. But clearly, Javonte Williams is not getting the opportunities that we hope for. At this point, I think a lot of people thought, myself included, that he would be the lead running back for the Broncos. But Melvin Gordon's not going away. Maybe. But it's now another disappointing game. 8 carries for 48 yards for him. He's been up and down. It's almost like alternating good games, bad games. But his high has been so far 17 PPR points when he scored a touchdown in Week 7 at Cleveland. That's how far back you have to go to where he had his best game of the year. Are we ever going to see Javonte Williams be a must-start fantasy running back?
I've maybe been on the flip side of Javonte Williams all season long, one direction or the other, and I'm going to do it again. Week 12 is finally Javonte Williams' week, okay. I believe. I'm going to try to go make some trades for Javonte Williams. This was a season high in snaps at 57%. I believe Melvin Gordon only played 3 snaps after the fumble. We have seen other rookies coming out of the bye get an increase in their workload, including his former teammate Michael Carter. So I expect Week 12 he plays the Chargers. He's going to run all over them. Week 13 he plays the Chiefs. He's going to run all over them. Then he gets the Lions. Go trade for Javonte Williams.
It's not just that. It's the Lions, it's the Bengals, it's the Raiders, it's the Chargers. Again, that's a dream schedule for any running back. So, yes, it's a great opportunity to go get Javonte Williams. So, thankfully, we don't have to worry about starting him next week. But maybe Melvin Gordon, had they played again next week, would have been on the bench already because of that fumble. That was a crucial part of that game. Maybe Teddy Bridgewater's trying to make a tackle as well. Let's keep the Broncos theme going here in regards to the receivers because Jerry Jeudy has yet to have the breakout game. But, Chris, I think worse off is Courtland Sutton has been an absolute disaster when Jerry Jeudy's been on the field. So, of the Broncos receivers, you want to factor in Tim Patrick as well, maybe Noah Fant. Do we have anybody that we could start comfortably when they come off their bye in Week 12?
I think Jerry Jeudy. Yeah, the 17 targets in the last 2 games, only 4 in the first game, coming back from the injury, but I think that was just a get-right game. He's had 17 targets in the last 2. His average depth of target is still 9 yards down the field. Not quite what it was last season, but that's to be expected with Courtland Sutton working as the deep threat. And Courtland Sutton really has not had much of a role since Jerry Jeudy came back. Obviously, he played that first game where Jeudy, missed most of the second half or all of the second half, and Sutton didn't really have a role, but that was in his first game back from the injury. He's still only averaging 3 targets per game in the 4 games that Jerry Jeudy has played, so clearly he has reverted to being more of a deep threat. I think his role will increase. I don't think he's going to be a 3 targets per game guy moving forward, but I think it's clear that he is just a deep threat in this offense right now. And playing with Teddy Bridgewater, it's kind of hard to produce big numbers in that role. So I think Jerry Jeudy's someone you can view as more like a wide receiver 3, maybe in that Javonte Smith range. Noah Fant's going to be in the wide receiver 1 discussion, probably in the top 14 most weeks. Other than that, there's not really anyone here that I'm viewing as a weekly starter. Courtland Sutton is a boomer bust wide receiver 4 right now.
All right, so you got these 2 receivers for the Broncos. Heath, I want to ask you about 3 wide receivers who we had some high expectations for 2 of them. One guy has come out of nowhere, Mike Williams. But when you got Terry McLaurin and Adam Thielen, Mike Williams, just how they've been playing lately. Thielen, we know, is a very touchdown-dependent receiver. McLaurin losing what the quarterback I thought was going to help him take the next step in Ryan Fitzpatrick. And then Williams has just been an absolute disaster of late. Who do you trust the most of those 3 guys moving forward?
I think it's probably going to be McLaurin. I'd put him in that DJ Moore range where I think the talent will overcome the situation more weeks than not, even if it hasn't so far. So I'd go with McLaurin as a borderline number 2. Then it would be Thielen, only because he scores so many touchdowns. I don't think he's going to get you a whole lot most weeks with his catches and his yards. Mike Williams, he's still droppable. I don't want to drop him because I still think he's still getting those red zone opportunities. I believe he had 3 targets inside the 5-yard line this week. So he's the perfect guy to have in your flex and just hope that he boosts.
Or just hope he doesn't bust, which has been the case more times than not lately. Chris, Kyle Pitts, we might have a situation developing with Cordero Patterson dealing with an ankle injury, so we'll see what happens Thursday night as they take on the Patriots. But it's been a little bit of a struggle. We had a couple of strong games for Kyle Pitts previously in the middle of the season, but we're getting to a point now where he's flashing some big-time potential, but not just putting together consistent production. And I don't want to judge it based on this game against the Cowboys because he got off to a good start, and he plays a position that's hard to get away from. But are we ever going to get the Kyle Pitts this season that we drafted as a borderline top 5 tight end?
Yeah, I think part of the problem here is he's getting the volume that we want for the most part, at least 7 targets in 4 of his last, really all but 3 games so far. But even recently, he had the 1 game with 6. That's his low since week 3. So we're getting the volume from him. The problem has been that he has such a downfield-oriented role, and Matt Ryan just hasn't been particularly effective throwing the ball downfield this season. That's kind of what we've seen, when they were missing Julio Jones last season, when they've been missing Calvin Ridley this season, there have been stretches where Matt Ryan just hasn't looked particularly comfortable pushing the ball down the field. Kyle Pitts is a rare downfield deep threat tight end who's working more as a wide receiver 1 for them. And so that means he's getting a lot of defensive attention and he's getting, somewhat low probability targets. So it's just going to be inconsistent from week to week, but I think the talent's going to win out. He's a must-start tight end. And it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a stretch moving forward where he was, the second best tight end or the best tight end in fantasy.
Patriots on a short week could be tough. They are the best statistically in terms of opposing fantasy points for tight ends. But then he gets Jacksonville in week 12, Tampa Bay in week 13. And so we'll see if he can maybe take advantage of those matchups as we head to the end of the fantasy regular season, moving into the fantasy playoffs.